Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 70, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. We're now in March and daylight savings time, and I would give almost any amount of money if we would just pick one or the other and stay there. I hate the time change. It always messes me up, and I can't quite figure out why as a society we can't fix this problem. But that's a sermon for another day. I am back from Sew Expo. Sew Expo is a sewing conference that's put on by Washington State University. It's held at the Washington State Fairgrounds in Puyallup, Washington, and that's a little bit east of Tacoma, just to give you an idea of the location and geography if you've never been to that part of the Pacific Northwest. This is my third year attending Sew Expo. My friend Tara and I went as students in 2023, and then I taught last year in 2024, and I taught again this year in 2025. And I thought I'd give you a recap of the show and what I experienced and where I think sewing might be going in the future. This is by no means comprehensive, and I'm only one person giving you my perspective. So if you're seeing something different, by all means, let me know. I left here on Monday, February 24th. My original plan was to spend the night in Spokane, which I usually do during the winter if I'm driving over to Seattle. In the winter, it takes me a little bit longer. I can do that drive in about 8 hours in the summer, but in the winter, it takes me about 10 hours, and I don't like to drive in the dark, and there just isn't enough daylight in this part of the country during the winter, so I usually break that trip up. But I looked at the weather forecast Sunday afternoon, and I also have to factor in driving over 3 mountain passes, the last of which is Snoqualmie Pass, just before I get to Seattle. I've driven over Snoqualmie Pass probably 50 times at this point at least, and 2 of those were in snowstorms. I don't recommend it. I can do it. I've done it. I have a Jeep Grand Cherokee with 4-wheel drive, and I have studded snow tires on my vehicle, and I also carry tire chains in the back. So I'm prepared for all weather conditions, but even though I am confident in my own abilities to drive in those conditions, I have watched people drive over Snoqualmie and act as though the roads are bare and dry. So it's not me I'm worried about, it's the other drivers taking me out. Seattle was supposed to get a big wind storm on Monday evening, and I figured it was probably better if I just got to Seattle in one day and got a hotel room. So I did that, and I think that turned out to be a good decision. I would have been driving through that windstorm as it moved across the state of Washington on Tuesday. As it was, I was in a hotel room when the worst of the windstorm hit, and except for the electricity flickering a little bit, I didn't notice much. Getting to Tacoma on Monday also gave me the opportunity to spend Tuesday doing some fabric shopping, which was a lovely bonus. So on Tuesday morning after breakfast, I checked out of the hotel and I headed over to the nearest Jo-Ann Fabrics. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about Jo-Ann Fabrics. I'm weary of the whole sad tale, and I think that what a lot of us are feeling is grief. At least grief is what I have identified that I'm feeling. It's almost like losing a friend that I've had my entire life. I also don't like to see the contentious discussions that are springing up around the closing. There are lots of reasons why this is happening. There is plenty of blame to go around. I feel for the employees that are having to go through this. I don't like to see people getting on their moral high horses and shaming other crafters who have shopped at Jo-Ann's. Yes, it's important to support your independent local retailers and Heaven knows that my local quilt stores get a lot of my money, but there are also things that they don't carry that I was able to get at Joann Fabrics. And now I'm going to have to find different places to source those materials. So I'm going to leave the discussion right there and just tell you what I saw at the stores in Seattle. I went to 4 of them altogether. I will tell you that every single store was just about completely out of sewing notions. Most of them were completely sold out of yarn. Most of them had lots and lots of bolts of fabric, some of which was still wrapped in plastic. And if I understand correctly, the stores are still getting shipments from the warehouses, and being as understaffed as they are, they're having trouble keeping up with those shipments and getting things put out on the floor. So a lot of the stores had fabric that was just kind of stacked haphazardly. The stores that I went to had just gone to cutting 1 yard minimums, and most of the fabric was about 20% off. And I know that some of these policies are not popular with people, but you have to remember that the liquidator paid money for the opportunity to liquidate these stores, and they're looking for a certain return on their investment. So whether or not you agree with that, that's just good business practice if you want to be a profitable company. I bought a few lengths of some apparel fabric. The one store that had a really good selection of apparel fabric had very long lines at both the cut counter and the checkout, which is something I experienced at all the stores. And I simply didn't have the time in my schedule to stand there and wait. I would have if I had had a couple of hours that I didn't need to be somewhere else. When I got back here to Kalispell and went to our local store, which was not part of the original list of closings, we still have a fair number of notions. I would say that most of the yarn is gone. I want to give our store manager a medal because she is somehow managing to keep her sense of humor throughout all of this, and she's really trying her best to make it a pleasant shopping experience for everyone. So that's what I'm seeing. I'm trying to stock up on a few basics. I've bought elastic, I've bought some interfacing, just things that I know that I'll need over the next couple of years that I don't want to have to order from Amazon or go searching for somewhere else. I also think that our local quilt store is planning to step up as much as they are able to. But again, it's a quilt store, and I don't expect them to carry a huge selection of apparel fabrics, although they do a wonderful job of bringing in some rayon batiks, and they've got some Brussels washer linen and a few other things that those of us who sew garments will have a local place to get some of that fabric. So back to my Tuesday in Seattle. After I went to the first Joann Fabrics, I drove up to Pacific Fabrics, which is just south of downtown Seattle. And this is one of my favorite fabric stores, bar none. They used to have, half a dozen locations around the Seattle area. And over the years, especially during the pandemic, they closed most of the all of the locations except the one that's still located south of downtown. But that's a 13,000 square foot shopping area. It's in an industrial area because they started as part of Pacific Iron, I think is the name of the company. I'll put the link to their story because it's really interesting how that company started. They carry an amazing selection of fabrics. They have quilting cottons, they have apparel fabrics, they have home deck fabrics, they have bridal fabrics, they've got patterns, they've got a small selection of yarn. It's just a fun place to visit. And I was quite happy to spend a couple of hours there. I came out with 3 yards of Kaufman Brussels washer linen in a beautiful clear red color. I have to be careful with reds because if they lean the least little bit orange, I have trouble with them, but a clear red or something that leans more toward the cooler end of the spectrum is perfect for me, and this was great. I got 3 yards for a dress. I bought 2 yards of a Fabulism cotton that just came out recently. I got 2 yards of an Anna Maria Perry rayon with coneflowers all over it that's destined to be a top. I got 2 yards of a Cloud 9 rayon, also destined to be a top, and I got a yard of Rifle and Paper Company canvas in the Alice in Wonderland line that's going to be an apron for me. After leaving Pacific Fabrics, I went to the Joann Fabrics in Tacoma and saw conditions there were very similar to the first Joann Fabrics that I had been to. I also did a little bit of shopping. I'm going to give a short fashion report here. I like to go to the JCPenney stores because Liz Claiborne is one of my favorite brands, only because it fits me really well. And it always has. So I always hit up the JCPenney stores in Seattle. And I will tell you that what I'm seeing this year is a lot of long skirts. Long skirts. Honestly, walking around some of those stores, I felt like I was back in the mid-'80s because I'm seeing a lot of the same things I wore when I was in high school. And I graduated from high school in 1984. So that should tell you what some of the trends are. Okay, I'm going to get to my recap of Sew Expo. Sew Expo didn't start officially until Thursday, but on Wednesday, they always have a day of longer form classes. So they have a 4-hour class period in the morning and a 4-hour class period in the afternoon. And this gives students an opportunity to take in-depth classes from some of the teachers. And I was teaching a sweater drafting class from 8 a.m. until noon. I had 3 students. My classes this year were smaller than last year, but I think that reflects an overall decrease in attendance. And for conference organizers, they have a really difficult job. They have to read the minds of their students and try and figure out what the students are going to want to take at any particular conference. I don't mind teaching smaller classes. I was going to be in Seattle anyway because this gives me an opportunity to see my kids. So I had 3 very engaged students, and we had a really in-depth session on sweater drafting. One of the students is working her way through the Master Knitting Program from TKGA, from the Knitting Guild of America, and in level 3, she has to design a sweater, either an Aran or a stranded sweater, and she wants to do an Aran, and she brought my Aran sweater design book with her, which was really cool. I enjoyed teaching that class because I like sweater drafting. I enjoy the process, and that gave me an opportunity to dig in a little bit deeper. I didn't have anything Wednesday afternoon, so I went to yet another Joann Fabrics and did some more shopping. My older daughter went to college in that area, so I'm not unfamiliar with it, and I'm really comfortable driving around there. The expo opened at 9:30 on Thursday morning. That's when the vendor hall opened. And this year, I'm not sure if it was because there's some construction happening at the fairgrounds or what, but we used to be in 3 different buildings, and this year we were consolidated down into 2 buildings. And all of the vendors were in a single building instead of being spread out between 2 buildings. And that was actually kind of nice. It was nice to be able to do all your shopping in one area. The first place I went in the vendor hall was to Amanda's Bundles. And this is a shop out of Los Angeles. They have an online store, and I'll put the link to it. They come to Sew Expo with just tons of fabric, and they specialize in athleisure fabric. So things like nylon spandex and what they call a peached performance fabric, things that have a little higher spandex cotton than maybe a cotton lycra. They also have a limited amount of designer dead stock. And the reason I went to their booth first was because they had some sewing themed peached performance fabric that I wanted because I want to make myself a hoodie. So I bought fabric from them. And that wasn't the only time I bought fabric. I was there 3 times over the show, and bought a lot of peached performance fabric, and I also scored 3 yards of an absolutely stunning Italian wool blend in black, which is going to end up probably being a skirt and or pair of pants for me. I was very happy with everything I got from Amanda's Bundles. After leaving their booth, I went to the Klume House booth because I like the Klume House supplies and I stocked up on a few things. I was excited to see that they have matte black rivets, which I haven't seen anywhere before, so I bought some of those. And I had to laugh because the cashier was checking me out and she recognized my name because I've ordered from them enough that apparently my name is distinctive enough for them to remember. So we had a little chat. I walked around and picked up a few more miscellaneous items, but Amanda's Bundles and Klume House were the two booths where I did most of my shopping. Classes started at 11 a.m. I'm not crazy about the class scheduling, but again, they're trying to please everybody, and that's impossible. So they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. And I just roll with whatever my schedule is at Sew Expo because I'd like to think that they're all trying their best. If you don't leave people enough time to shop, they get annoyed, the vendors get upset. If you try to cram too many classes into one day, people get overloaded. So again, I'm assuming they're doing the best they can. My first class went from 11 to 1:30, and it was what's wrong with my knitting. It was kind of a knitting troubleshooting class. And again, it was a small class, so I was able to give some personalized instruction to all the students. And we talked about the different ways to knit and different techniques, how to tell when something's going wrong with your knitting. Those 2.5 hours go by really quickly. And before I knew it, it was 1:30. There are food vendors in the building where I was teaching, but I knew that I would only have half an hour for lunch. And I also knew that lunch lines tended to be long. So I had arranged to just bring some lunch with me. I went and got some sandwiches and salads and things like that for each day that I was teaching, just so I wouldn't have to go to the vendors. So I ate my lunch in the classroom where I was teaching. And at 2 o'clock, my next class started, which was a basic cabling class. And again, a small class, so I was able to give individualized attention, and I think it went well. I was happy with the way all of my classes went. By 4:30, I was pretty wiped out, so I went back to the Airbnb, had dinner, and vegetated for a while before bed. On Friday, it was wash, rinse, and repeat. I went and did a little bit of shopping, and then at 11 o'clock, I had my lace knitting class, and that went really well. We did different kinds of lace. I may make some changes to that handout if I teach that class next year, but I'm thinking of doing some different classes. In the afternoon, I taught a class on adding color to cable patterns. And you might wonder how that's possible. We did slip stitch cables, we did mosaic cables, which is a form of slip stitch knitting, and we did intarsia cables. And again, just enough material for the allotted class time, and really enjoyed teaching that one as well. I had nothing scheduled until 2 p.m. on Saturday, so I decided to take a class. I signed up for the Nadia No-Show underwear class. I've been wanting to make my own underwear, and this seemed like a good opportunity to try it. The class was taught by Amanda from Amanda's Bundles, and the kit included a yard of their peached performance fabric, as well as the Nadia No-Show undies from Made for Mermaids. And again, I'll link all of this in the show notes, so if you're interested, you can take a look. These aren't necessarily the kind of underwear that I want to make for myself, but it was a great experience. We were able to cut 2 pair of underwear out of the yard of fabric, and the pattern is pretty clever. It's cut on the fold, so there's only one seam, and that's at the back. So we did the seams on the Bernina sergers, and I obviously had no trouble with that because I teach on Bernina sergers. And then we cover stitched the seam using, again, the Bernina combo machines. And once you sew in the gusset fabric, which is just a cotton lycra, once you sew that in, the underwear is done. There's no finishing around the top edges or the openings of the legs because they're intended to be no-show under things like leggings or close-fitting pants. And after we finished, a few of us went into the restroom and tried on our underwear. And I like the way it fits. I might make some adjustments to the pattern. I need to make them in a smaller size. I made them based on my hip size, and I could see that after a day of wearing them, they might start falling down. So I would go down a size if I made them again. But what I really want to do is try using the Peached Performance fabric to make my husband a pair of Comox trunks from Thread Theory, because I think he would appreciate that fabric. Everyone says that once you start making your own underwear, you never go back to store-bought, and I can see where that would be the case. It certainly wouldn't take me more than maybe an afternoon to knock out half a dozen pair of underwear, and I could make them in the fabric that I like, and I know that they would last. My last class teaching at Sew Expo was Saturday afternoon from 2 to 4:30, and that was my All About Thread class. That's a class that I've taught locally probably half a dozen times, and Wonderfill did a great thing for me. They put together thread kits with 6 different threads. They have 36 in their line, so we couldn't do a comprehensive overview of all of their threads, but Wonderfill chose 6 representative threads, and I give those to the students in a kit with about 8 5-inch squares of Kona that I've backed with some lightweight interfacing just to stabilize it, and also 2 applique shapes, like I'll do hearts or stars or things like that, that is backed in Steam-A-Seam so that they can adhere it to their squares and then practice appliquing around it with one of the threads. And I enjoy that class because people have a lot of aha moments in the class where things suddenly start to fall into place and click for them. Teaching it at Sew Expo throws a bit of a wrench into the works, and only because we're in a classroom where one of the local sewing and vac companies has provided all of the sewing machines. And I'll tell you, if you're looking for a sewing machine, check out these conferences. This is how I bought my Janome 6600P. It had been used one day at a quilt conference, and the stores always take them back and go over the machines from top to bottom and sell them at a discounted price with a full warranty. So if you're looking for a particular machine, or there's one that's maybe out of your price range, check at conferences, because you can sometimes get a screaming deal on a lightly used machine. So we were on the Brother Innovis machines, which I had no complaints about them. I thought they were a great mid-level machine. They had a number of decorative stitches. So what I have the students do each time we use a different thread is do a straight stitch, a zigzag, and then 3 or 4 decorative stitches so that they can see how that thread stitches out on the fabric. I'm pretty mechanically inclined, so using an unfamiliar machine doesn't throw me, but I do know it throws a lot of people. If you're sitting down at a machine that you've never used before, that can be a little bit tricky. The stores do have an employee in each classroom that's there to help do some troubleshooting. So we did have somebody who was more familiar with the machine who could help us. And for the most part, I think the students were able to get through the handout and see what the differences were in each of the threads. I was pretty wiped out by that point. I had been teaching for 4 days and I was ready to hit the road. My older daughter flew down from Alaska because she's shopping for a new car. So we made arrangements that I would swing by the airport. Her plane landed at 4 o'clock. I was done teaching at 4:30. So I packed up and headed out and went by the airport and picked her up just as she was coming out of baggage claim. We went up to Seattle and I had reserved a different Airbnb there. It's one that I've stayed at pretty regularly when I'm in town because it's convenient. So we went and checked into that Airbnb and went to the Whole Foods that was down the street and got some dinner. My younger daughter had friends visiting that weekend, so we didn't get to see her until Sunday afternoon. And Sunday and Monday, my older daughter and I went car shopping. I dropped her off at the airport early Tuesday morning so she could get a flight back to Ketchikan, where she lives, and I hit the road and headed home. So my general feeling about this year's Sew Expo was that it was smaller than the 2 previous years. I noticed that several vendors were absent. So Joe Vecchiarelli, who is he's a designer that lives in Los Angeles, and he does the costumes for Dancing with the Stars and Disney and some other famous people and celebrities. And he's got a company called French European. They usually had a big booth. They were absent this year. Gamel was absent this year. Even the vendors who had been there before, like Klumhaus, they seem to have downsized their booth space a bit. I think even the sewing classes, there were a few teachers who always sell out, like Katrina Walker usually sells out her serger classes. But I didn't see a lot of sold out classrooms. I think in some ways Sew Expo is another victim of the pandemic and maybe is having trouble recuperating from that. I also think that with so many teachers teaching online classes now, there's really no incentive for people to travel. Travel is expensive. There may have been some personnel issues because I was dealing with one class coordinator until about September, and then all of a sudden she disappeared and I was dealing with a different class coordinator. So I wonder if that played into it. I do worry a bit that these kind of in-person conferences are becoming less popular. So we'll see what happens going forward. I will definitely be submitting class proposals to next year's Sew Expo. I'd like to start doing more sewing classes, but I'm also perfectly happy teaching the knitting classes. So we'll have to see what happens. I'm back home now, and March is a difficult month here in Montana. It's that season where the temperatures start to get up into the 40s and everybody thinks it's spring, and then we get a snowstorm. March is the month when I have to start thinking about getting over to the greenhouse and cleaning it out and getting plants started. I'm feeling a bit panicky because March is also the month where my sewing time usually comes to an end. I get most of my sewing done over the winter. When spring hits, I am outside doing stuff and working in the garden, and my sewing time really takes a hit. So at the moment, I am working on a tamarack jacket. Someday I may do a podcast episode on my quilted jacket saga that started with some quilted fabric I bought at Hobby Lobby last fall, intending to make a quilted jacket, and that still hasn't happened. The quilt store in Missoula, though, wants a quilted jacket class, and the tamarack has been in my pile of patterns to play around with. So it was a good opportunity to make up a class sample, and that's what I've been working on. I stopped in Spokane on my way to Seattle and went to the Quilting Bee, which is a big quilting store in Spokane, and I got fabric there for the tamarack. I am enjoying making it. There are a few things I would change if I make it again, but I just need to get this class sample done, and I'm trying to do that before next week. My husband has been out of town for a couple of days and will be back on the day this episode airs, so I haven't had to cook, which is lovely for me. I usually have ice cream for dinner when he's out of town, and I don't have to limit my sewing time quite as much to take care of him, which I don't mind doing. That's part of my job as his wife, but it means that I can sew more, and so I'm trying to take advantage of that. Once the tamarack jacket is done, I have a couple of tops to make for my friend Susan's grandsons. They tell Auntie Janet what they want, and Auntie Janet makes it for them. And after that, I will probably get started on some warmer weather items for my wardrobe. with some of the fabrics that I bought while I was on this trip. Thank you to all of you who have sent feedback or made comments or left reviews on Apple Podcasts. I'm getting kind of a kick out of some of them, and I appreciate all the feedback. The show notes for this episode can be found at the podcast website, which is www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. My website is at www.janetzabo.com, with links to the Big Sky Knitting Designs website and also to my blog, where you can see photos of the projects that I'm working on. I have hired someone to help me with my social media, and she's doing a great job of getting things up onto Instagram. So if you'd prefer to check me out on Instagram, I'm over there under Straight Stitch Podcast. You can send me email at janet@janetzabo.com. You can use the fan mail feature, which is at the beginning of each podcast episode. There are lots of ways to get in touch with me, and I love hearing from all of you. So until the next episode, I hope that you have a great week and that you get to go sew something.